Hello Jamf Nation, and welcome to Deploying Jamf Configurations at Scale, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the API. Before we begin, please take a moment to look at the forward-looking statement on your screen. Don't worry if you don't get a chance to read it all, as it will be available for you to read later. My name is Tom Reyes. I'm a systems engineer at Electric. We are a managed service provider in New York City, New York, and we deploy Jamf at scale to a wide variety of customers across many different industries. So, what does that look like? Everyone is familiar with one Jamf instance. You have your Jamf server, whether it be in the cloud or on-prem. You can log into the GUI. You can upload policies, scripts, packages. But what if you have many Jamf servers? How do you upload the same scripts, the same packages, the same extension attributes to all of those servers? And how do you do it quickly, efficiently, and so you get the same results every single time? Well, today's presentation is going to dive right into an easy way to do that, utilizing the built-in features of the Jamf API. Some of the things we're going to talk about during this presentation, including how do we locate and download an existing object in Jamf Pro via the API. Before we can do anything with an object, such as copy it to another server or hundreds of servers, we first need to find out where it is. Before we even begin to copy it, though, we first need to prepare that object to be uploaded to a different Jamf Pro instance so it can be accepted by that instance and used appropriately by the clients connecting to it. Don't worry, we'll get into that a little bit later. We're then going to replicate that object, whether it's a policy, a script, or an extension attribute, to as many Jamf instances as you have. 1, 100, 200, or at Electric, we have over 400. We're also going to explore some caveats and hidden features of the Jamf API that you may not be aware of, or things to consider when you're uploading all your different objects to your various Jamf Pro servers. So let's go ahead and jump right in. First, we have to ask ourselves, why use the API? What can the API do for me that I can't already do on my own using the Jamf GUI? Well, as we mentioned, perhaps you have more than one Jamf Pro server, and perhaps you want to copy objects from one server to another. Now, there are tools out there that already accomplish this quite easily, such as Jamf Pro Migrator provided by Jamf. Some of the downsides to that, though, are that Jamf Pro Migrator can only operate on one server at a time, which is not all that efficient when we need to copy things to dozens or even hundreds of servers. So, it leads us to our next point. Using the API can be a significant time saver. Now, not all of us has a fleet of interns that can work for us on a given basis, or even a large IT department. So, we don't have the resources available to us to have everything operated on at the same time. So that means we need to do things quickly and efficiently. Also, it means we need to do less manual work. As much as we can automate, the better. As much as we can push out on a reliable, scripted basis, the better. That leads us to our next point. Doing this in an automated, repeatable fashion reduces the chances of error. It means that we're going to have the same results every single time we execute our API calls and every single time we push objects to different Jamf server instances. It also allows us to increase standardization across our Jamf Pro servers, whether they be in the cloud or on-prem. We're going to get the same results, the same policy names, the same scripts, the same extension attributes in every instance that we have. This ensures us that if we need to check on a policy executing on one server, we can verify that it's the same policy that's on all our other servers. So we know exactly where to look and we know exactly what we're checking. That leads us to this funny word at the bottom. We need to maintain idempotency. Idempotency, what does that mean? It's simply a fancy word for doing the same thing over and over again and achieving the same results and guaranteeing that those results are standard. Think of it this way. Every time you add 0 to a number, you get the same number. The number itself never changes. Whether you add 0 to that number once or you add 0 to that number 100 times, you're always going to end up with the same number. And that's key for deploying objects across our fleet. We always want to end up with the same results every single time, whether that object needs to be created for the first time or whether it exists already and shouldn't be created again. More on that just a little bit later. So now we know why we need to use the API. What are some of the things the API can do for us? Specifically, what can it do at scale? So as we mentioned before, we can upload policies to all your Jamf servers, no matter how many you have. And again, whether that server happens to be on-prem, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's Jamf Cloud or hosted in your own private cloud. And it's more than just policies. We can upload scripts, extension attributes, and many more things as well. This cuts down on the large amount of manual work we as Jamf administrators have to do on a daily basis. What's one of the things we have to do on a daily basis, especially if you're maintaining more than one server? Collect license data. Every year, or month, quarter, depending upon your relationship with Jamf, Jamf is going to ask you for the inevitable Jamf summary. That means logging into Jamf, going to settings, scrolling to the bottom, clicking on that gear, printing out that report, and emailing to Jamf. What if we could scour our entire fleet and get the numbers that Jamf wanted and submitted them in an easy-to-read report that Jamf could digest and compare all at once? How much work did that just save you right there? Or maybe you have multiple techs across multiple locations, each responsible for their own subset of servers, or responsible for your entire fleet of Jamf Pro servers. Logging into each server, creating the accounts for them is very time consuming. Not to mention how many permission boxes might you have to check depending upon the permission set that you want your new technician to have. And what are the odds you're going to check those boxes repeatedly and consistently every single time you log in? Leveraging the API, we can create those user accounts quickly, easily, efficiently, and reproducible to get the same exact permission set every single time. Now, what if that tech that we just hired, we created all those accounts for, decides to up and leave? We can't have an account sitting out there. So just as what we create, we can also destroy. Leveraging the API, we can remove those user accounts, we can remove those policies, and various other objects that we may not want deployed across a single instance or across multiple instances in our fleet. So let's take a quick look at an example at how we're going to go ahead and do that. Here we have our one Jamf server. Some people use a template server that only they have access to, that they create policies to, or maybe it's one that's in your fleet. So let's go ahead and create a policy on it. We'll call it Firefox. We'll create that policy that exists in our server. We set it up how we want. We put the packages that we want to install. We scope it to the smart groups that we need, and we set frequencies and scope check-in parameters. Now we're going to take that policy and we're going to download it to a computer where we can manipulate it, work on it, and compare it to all the other servers in our fleet. And there's multiple ways to download this policy from your Jamf server itself. We'll get into that just a little bit later. Now, we have this policy, we have it local, we can operate on it. How do we get it to all our existing Jamf servers? First thing we're going to do is utilize an API method known as get. We're going to reach out to one of those Jamf servers and see if this policy exists on that server already. So we can see this call is reaching out to this Jamf server, looking for all the policies on that server. And that server is going to return a list of those policies to see what exists already. And we see we have a few policies to install various pieces of software, update inventory, and perform some other functions. Now we're going to take the list that we've pulled from that server, and we're going to compare it to the name of the policy that we just created. And we're going to find out that this policy doesn't currently exist. So now we can utilize another API method known as post and copy it to that Jamf server. We'll go ahead and copy it there. And pay attention to that policies endpoint. You'll notice it has a unique ID, 0 at the end. We're going to come back to that later and discuss why that's important. But for right now, let's go ahead and copy that policy to our Jamf server. Simple, easy, quick. We now have a brand new, an exact copy of the Firefox policy we just created on a completely different Jamf server. Now let's do it a few more times. Can reach out to other Jamf servers, see what policies they have, compare it against the policy that we already created, and notice that some of these Jamf servers may already have the Firefox policy. Perhaps we deployed it before, or perhaps it was created under some other method. So we don't need to deploy our new policy to those servers. Let's go ahead and deploy the policy we created to only those servers that need it. Quick, simple, efficient, and now all of our servers have our Firefox policy all ready to go. How much time did that just save you? So the question you're asking yourself right now, hopefully, maybe not, is where's my stuff? Tom, you told us about the policies, you told us about the API, you told us about getting a list of policies. How do I find that? I can't log into the GUI. That just shows me all the stuff you told me not to look at. Jamf provides a convenient URL for you to access this data. All you need to do is go to your Jamf URL, whether it's, again, in the cloud or on-prem, and put /API at the end. And you'll notice when you get there, you'll find this landing screen. And we have two choices. We have the classic API, and we have the Jamf Pro API. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to focus on the classic API. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of which is this little message right here. It may impact or break functionality. As you notice up top, the Jamf Pro API is still in beta. That means endpoints are getting added, endpoints are being removed, or some are being changed. So to guarantee that we have a successful process that we can use in production, for right now, we're going to focus on the classic API. There's a couple other reasons we're going to do that as well. The classic API favors XML over JSON, and that's what we're going to use in this conversation. Why we're doing that? JSON's cool. It's hot. It's happening. But we're going to focus on XML. The classic API, as I mentioned, tends to handle that better. Also, all the tools needed to parse XML and transform it to our needs already exist on your Mac. Some of the tools that you need to manipulate JSON and parse JSON don't come native to the Mac itself, and you might need to download them from a third-party vendor, get them installed, create dependencies, environmental variables, so we're not going to worry about that for right now. So, we talked about endpoints. Endpoints are simply where things live in the API. Each object in the API lives at an endpoint, whether it's a policy, a list of policies, a script, computers, computer objects, smart groups, they all end at an endpoint. So how do we get to an endpoint? First, we take our Jamf URL and we append /JSS resource to the end of it. It should be noted as a point of reference that if you're using Jamf Cloud, it's simply your Jamf URL. If you're using an on-prem installation, you're going to have to put :8443 and then /JSS resource. Now we can dig down further into the actual endpoints that we're looking for. The first endpoint we see here is policies. This is a list of all the policies in our Jamf Pro server. It's going to give us the name of the policies along with an associated ID number that Jamf uses to keep track of these policies. Hold on to that thought because we're going to come back and use that in a second. We're going to focus for a minute on the endpoint below that. The policies /ID/number. That number is unique to the policy in the Jamf Pro instance, as I mentioned before. Every time you upload a policy to Jamf Pro, it's going to be assigned a unique number by Jamf. So if we go to our Jamf URL /JSS resource /policies /ID / a specific number, which we gathered by looking at the policies endpoint above it, we're going to find a unique policy. So what exactly, if we were to do that, what exactly does that look like? We see this whole big XML document on the right. We'll see it has the name of the policy. We'll see it has the triggers that need to be set, the frequency that it needs to execute, and some other items in there. So that's great. We now figured out where our policy lives in the Jamf instance. But what do we do with it? How do we get it? We need to bring it, as we mentioned before, down to a local machine so we can operate on it and then copy it to other Jamf Pro instances. There's a couple different ways by which we can do that. The easiest method is to copy and paste it. We can highlight the XML, copy it, and save it to a document on our local machine. Easy, simple, somewhat time-consuming, but it works. We can also use the curl binary. Curl is a simple binary used to retrieve items and objects from websites. By using the curl binary, we can simply reference the Jamf URL, reference the specific policy endpoint, and output it to a file on our machine. The curl binary is going to play a specific role later as we discuss some of the caveats of working with the Jamf API. A recent feature to the Jamf API landing page is this little download button in the bottom right. All we need to do now is simply download our appropriate endpoint, again, whether it's a policy, a script, list of policies, and Jamf will download an XML file for us in our downloads folder. Be careful, those files aren't really named what you think they might be named, so pay attention to what you're downloading, when you're downloading it, or you're going to end up with a lot of XML files with alphanumeric characters that you may or may not understand. So great, now we have our policy. What can we do with it? Well, as I mentioned before, we want to upload it to another Jamf instance, but before we do that, we need to find out if that policy exists already. So how do we do that? On the Jamf instance that we want to upload, using the previous endpoint that I mentioned, /policies, we can retrieve a list of all the policies in that specific Jamf instance. And here it is. So that's really not too helpful. It's an XML document. There's no line breaks. There's a whole bunch of extraneous data. We can't really do much with it in terms of trying to figure out if the policy that we just created exists in this instance. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to get it into a format that we can use? We're going to use a simple tool known as an XSL Template, or Extensible Style Sheet Language Transformation Template. And what that looks like is this. It's simply an XML template that indicates what endpoint we're referencing, as you can see, policies, what we want to extract from that endpoint, a policy, and specifically the value associated with what we're extracting. So in this case, it's name. And all we do in this case is take the template that we created, save it to an XSLT document, apply it to all the policies, XML that we downloaded previously, and then create a new document, in this case, formatted policy list. That will give us this document, a simple, easy to use text document of just the names of the policies in the Jamf instance that we want to copy our downloaded object to. Now we can read this list, we can parse it, and more importantly, we can use it in scripts. And that's where the important part comes in. We want to take this, what we've downloaded, be able to use it in a script and copy it to all the other Jamf instances that may need it. So by having it in this format, it gives us an easy to use method to do this. So what does using it in a script look like? Let's take a look. So here's a simple script. Don't worry about reading it all. It's a lot to take in right now. There's a lot of information on this page. It's also not a full script. It's just segments of a script that's useful to illustrate the points we're trying to make. There'll be a chance at the end of this presentation with links to some resources to actually go and view full-length scripts and other examples. We can go and try these on your own. So we look at line 1 in the script, we'll see policy name. And all that's doing is extracting the name of the policy that we just created and downloaded on our own. Why are we doing that? Why are we just not copying it and putting it into the script? Well, maybe we missed a space. Maybe we missed a character. Maybe when we type it, we type in a space or type in an extraneous character. This line allows us to actually get the script, the name of the policy that we downloaded without any errors or interruptions. So then, within the script, we create our XSLT document. And again, the document that simply states what do we need to retrieve from the other instances going forward. So we've got our policy name. We've got a template to retrieve names of policies from another instance. Now let's go ahead and get those policies. So we notice on line 16, we have the start of a loop. We're going to read through a list of instances. Now where you have that instance, that list of instances is up to you. I sometimes use a text file. You can have them in any format that you like, so as long as you can read through it or parse it with a loop. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to reference our Jamf URL that we want to copy these policies to, and we're going to get all the policies. And then we're going to apply that XSLT template and format that list so we end up with a text file that we saw before. Now, once we have that list, we can call another while loop, as noticed on line 23, and read through that list. And we can check if the name of the policy that we fetched in line 1 exists in the list of policies that we just downloaded from our instance. If it doesn't exist, down here on line 31, we can go ahead and upload the policy file that we created to our new Jamf instance. And you can see that referenced by the switch /t at the end. And there's a lot of things happening in this curl statement. As I mentioned, curl is the binary we use to put and retrieve things from the Jamf instance. So in this case, we're using curl. We're giving it a username and password, and this can be any username and password in your JSS that has privileges to retrieve and write items to the JSS. So as long as they have the ability to post policies and create policies, they can use the API. You do not need anything special here. We're going to give it a type XML. We're going to specify the URL that we're uploading it to, and again, we're going to reference that ID 0. Pay attention to that. Notice all we need to do is just reference that ID 0. Then we're going to reference the policy file that we created and saved someplace earlier. We saved it as a variable. And then we're going to use the post command. Post, which we'll talk about in a minute, does exactly what it says it does. It posts things to a new JSS or a different JSS. It takes that file you created, that XML file, and posts it to another JSS. And then once that's executed, we have our new policy in the JSS, and it's ready to go. It has its triggers, it has its frequency, it has its name. It is ready to be deployed to whatever clients are attached to that JSS. So let's go ahead and take a look at that process once again. We create our Firefox policy. We download it locally to work on. We take a look at all the policies in another JSS. We see if it exists. If it doesn't exist, we go ahead and copy it to one of our Jamf instances. And then we repeat that process as many times as it takes. So again, if you have one Jamf instance you need to copy it to, if you have 10, if you have 1,000, this process will scale to all of that. All you need to worry about is retrieving the object from your Jamf instance and then placing it in a script so we can copy it to all the other Jamf instances in your fleet. The API will take care of the rest. Simple, I know, but it works. Trust me. So let's talk about some caveats when using the API, because you knew it wasn't going to be just that easy. So there's a couple things we need to talk about in terms of API and curl commands. So we mentioned post before. Post does exactly what it says, as I mentioned. It puts a new object into the JSS. If that object doesn't exist, it will create the object. Put will essentially do the same thing. If that object doesn't exist, it will put the new object there. But they are different. Post only creates objects. While put is capable of creating new objects, it will also, and is primarily intended to update existing objects. Let's say that we've updated it, we put a script into our JSS, and then we realize that a certain variable name is wrong. Now we need to upload that script to all our other JSSs. Well, we can't just upload and post the new script again, because as we just shown in the previous example, we check to see if that policy exists. So when we run the script to post the same policy or the same script, the API is going to tell us, wait a minute, that policy already exists, just stop it right there. So what we do is we use put, and put will update certain parts of API endpoints. So if we need to change the name of a policy, if we need to change the category it's assigned to, if we need to change parts of the script itself, we can use put and simply update part of an endpoint. To that note, standardization is key. We want to make sure that when we upload items to the JSS, we're doing a consistent and repeatable process. So I find it best to name things the same, put things in a certain order. Perhaps you begin every policy with a capital letter. Perhaps all your install policies end with install or date that you uploaded it. As long as it's consistent, so you know that it's exactly the same in every single Jamf instance, that will help you out tremendously. And also a good point to bring up that's very important when it comes to post. We talked about idempotency before. And post in and of itself is not idempotent. Post will create a new object as many times as you tell it to. So in our example before, when we uploaded a Firefox policy, if we ran that script again and didn't check if the policy already existed, JSS and Jamf Pro, not the JSS anymore, will happily create another Firefox policy. If we ran it again, it would create another one. Next thing you know, we have a few dozen Firefox policies in our instance that we don't need. So we must be careful with that. Post, again, will put an object there as many times as you need it. It does not care if the object exists already. Put, on the other hand, will only operate, will not create a new object if the object exists. It will only update the object itself. So if we're going to, and put, so by its definition, is idempotent. The same thing as it's not mentioned here is delete. Delete is also idempotent. Technically, it's not, but you can only delete an item once. If it doesn't exist, the worst you're going to get is an error message. So put in and of itself is idempotent. Extraneous information, dependencies. What does that mean? We noticed before that the Jamf policy we downloaded to upload to our other instances had a bunch of information in it. Some key information there to be aware of is the ID number. As I mentioned before, Jamf assigns every object within the Jamf instance a unique ID number. So we have to remove that information from our XML file before we upload it, or it could collide with an existing item of the same name, or excuse me, the same ID number. So we don't want that. That's okay. That's where that ID 0 is going to come back to help us in a minute. Dependencies. What does that mean? Policies and API objects will upload regardless of what's required of them. So in other words, with that Firefox policy, perhaps it's installing a package, perhaps it's installing a script, perhaps it's scoped to a smart group. The Jamf API doesn't care if those items exist already. It will happily create the policy without them. But if those policies do not exist, Jamf is not smart enough, and the API is not smart enough to go back later and attach those items once you upload them. If they didn't exist when you uploaded them, Jamf won't attach them later. But don't worry, if they do exist beforehand, Jamf knows to match them up just by name. So if you have a policy that's calling a specific package or scoped to a specific smart group, or requires anything else outside of just basic payloads in a policy profile, make sure you upload those first. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself doing a lot of extra work. So it's really important to standardize and plan out your policy uploads. Not all XML is equal. What does that mean? XML is XML, right? Different tags, different issues. XML is encoded. What that means is when we look at XML on a screen, it's in human readable format. So we see it nice, it's presented to us, we can read it, we can interpret what it's doing. When we exchange that information between computers, some of the objects that we need to represent are represented by symbols, such as in scripts, ampersands, greater than, equal to. So if we were just to copy and paste the script and put it in a policy, the API would say, I don't understand what this means. I don't know what a question mark is. So in cases like this, when we're using API endpoints with specialized languages, scripts and extension attributes come to mind, it's best to use curl to download the object initially. Curl will pull the raw XML, and then when you go to upload that policy later to different Jamf servers, will act on it appropriately. Not all objects have an endpoint. Jamf is working on this. Jamf is becoming an API-first company, so that every object in the GUI has an actual endpoint. But currently, certain things in Jamf instances do not have a matching endpoint in the API. So things like pre-stage enrollments. It would be great if you could upload them to all your Jamf servers. But currently, this is not exposed via the API. An example of things that are coming are ABM tokens. How many times have you logged into a Jamf server only to figure out that your ABM token has expired? Well, it would be great if we could report on that via some sort of script or scraping it with the API. Currently, that's not exposed, although in the Jamf Pro API, that is now an available endpoint. Another interesting caveat is that GUI names don't always equal the API names. So, for instance, you might create an inventory search of all your clients' OSs, and you want to upload that to all your Jamf instances, so it's easily reportable. So you go into the API and look for inventory searches. Well, for whatever reason, in the Jamf API, they're known as advanced inventory searches. So be mindful of that. And there's a couple other caveats too, such as smart groups, which are known as computer groups. Why this is, I don't know. It just is, and something to be mindful for. A couple little known API features that we might want to be aware of that will help you as you start to develop your own scripts and start to upload objects into your own Jamf Pro instances. We talked a lot about ID0. What does that mean? Now let's dive into it just a little bit. ID0 is Jamf's automatic endpoint, so to speak. That being, I talked about the need to strip out the ID numbers in your XML documents, and that we can't upload endpoints that may match an existing endpoint based upon ID number. So if we take the items out of there, if we take the ID numbers out of there, how do we know where to put them in our Jamf instance? How do we know where they belong in that specific endpoint? That is where ID0 comes in. Simply upload an object to ID0 for your endpoint. So in this case, we looked at policies/ID/0, and Jamf will automatically fill in the next available slot for that endpoint. You don't need to worry about checking to see if it exists already, checking to see if it will collide or put error out. As long as you specify ID0 with a post request, not a put, by the way. When we're using put, we actually do need to know where the policy exists and how to upload to that specific policy. But when we're creating new policies, all you can do is simply upload to ID0 as the last line of your endpoint, and Jamf will automatically put it in the right spot. Password. If you were to create an account password for a new user, or an account template, and you're going to copy that to all your Jamf servers, you'd notice when you look at the API that password is hashed for security reasons, obviously. So we can't copy that hash to other Jamf servers, otherwise it won't get interpreted correctly, and that password will be useless. A lesser known documented feature is this set of XML tags. We can simply put this below the account name and the new user's password in that, and the appropriate password will get passed to the correct Jamf instance. I should note here that password via your scripts is typically passed in clear text, so you want to be mindful of that, as it could be a security concern depending upon your environment. Next, we look at this F switch. This can be used in curl statements, as we discussed before. We talked about the user switch, how to post things, how to add our XML headers. The F switch is useful because it denotes file. So all we need to do is put /F, name equals @ and a path to a local file, and we can upload that file to our Jamf instance. Why is this specifically useful? It's noted in the yellow text there, icon files. Say we want to create a policy and we want to upload it to self-service. Well, if we don't upload an icon file with it, we're going to have a lot of policies with a lot of generic icons that are confusing to a lot of users. Utilizing the F switch, we can actually upload an icon file with our policy or as a separate policy, so that way policies display correctly in self-service. The last one might be the most interesting. It is how to upload packages directly to the Jamf Pro server. Many users wish they could upload packages across their fleet without having to go into each individual instance. While this endpoint isn't explicitly documented by Jamf, it is possible using this methodology to upload a software package from your local machine to one or multiple Jamf instances. That's it. That's our journey through the Jamf API. Simple, quick, efficiently powers you to do your job at scale and reliably through your day. For more information, you can check out my GitHub site as listed on the screen. I appreciate your time and thank you for listening. If you'd be so kind as to give some feedback by completing the widget below, we'd appreciate it. Thank you and have a great day.